Starting to record. Okay, I think we're gonna start. Enough people are gonna join us. We'll let them in as we go along. So good morning, everybody. My name is Yara Dicher, and I am the head of Robus's International Department. I'm happy to host you today in this Doing Business in the New Middle East webinar. We have two very interesting organizations taking part in our webinar today, and our speakers are even more interesting. I'm going to let them present themselves. But first, a little bit about the different organizations. So the first is Loggerhead Partners, which is the provider of multifamily office services such as estate planning, transaction advisory, tax planning, and corporate structuring. It has offices in Dubai, Nicosia, and Zurich. And their Dubai office is actually specializing in corporate services involving a UAE entity structuring, residency planning, and ongoing administration services. And on the Israeli end, we have JST Co law firm that is a one-stop shop business law firm located in Ramat Gan, right next to the Tel Aviv Stock and Diamond Exchange, right in the beating heart of Israel's business sector. The firm provides premium legal services for corporate and private clients in Israel and abroad, including many publicly traded companies, well-established private companies, startups, entrepreneurs, and investors. Among others, the firm advises clients on international commercial transactions of varying complexities and is ideally placed to assist Israeli businesses to expand to the UAE and advise UAE businesses looking to expand to Israel. Before I present our speakers today, I would just like to say that if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to write them in the chat box, and we will refer to all questions at the end. So please feel free to do that. So our speakers today from Loggerhead, we have Marius Karokaritis, he's the founding and managing partner. We have Nicholas Rochette, which is head of the UAE, and Joel Neven, relationship manager. Marius, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Marius. Like Yara said, founding partner of Loggerhead Partners. I am actually Cypriot, and I commute between Cyprus and Dubai. I've been associated with the UAE for close to 18 years, and I saw an opportunity in the market, and in 2014, I formed Loggerhead Partners. I am an ex-banker by training, worked in the US, Switzerland, UK, UAE, Cyprus, and Greece. And I would like to welcome you to this discussion today about the Abraham Records and what it means for business between the UAE, Israel, and the region at large. Thank you, Yara.
Nicholas?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Yara. I'm the regional manager of Loggerhead in Dubai. We specialize here in corporate structuring, mainly on UAE structures. My background is banking, finance. I was previously working for Société Générale in Geneva and in London as well. And I joined Marius in this venture 5 years ago. So that's about me. I specialize really in corporate structuring in the UAE.
Thank you, Nicholas and Joel. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Yara. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Joel. I am a relationship manager at Loggerhead Partners, originally from South Africa. I've been living in the UAE for about 4 years now. I've got a background in wealth and investment management and financial planning, and I work with Nicholas in our Dubai-based office where we advise on and execute UAE solutions for our clients.
All right, great to have you. So on the Joseph Shem Tov side, on the Israeli side, we have Gil Rosen, and he is a partner at the law firm. And we have his guest, Shlomi Fogel, which is the chairman of the AMPA Group. Gil, would you like to say a couple of words?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for attending today. So as Yara says, I'm a partner at Joseph Shem Tov Company, which is a boutique business law firm. I'm licensed to practice law both in England and in Israel, and international commercial transactions are really bread and butter and fun stuff that I do. And I'm looking forward to discussing possibilities of international transactions between Israel and the UAE.
Whoever's speaking, we can hear you. I think Jolan, maybe put here, I'll put it on mute. All right, Shlomi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Would you like to say a couple of words to present?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you today here. And I'm a businessman involved in the Middle East from 1982 and involved also in our office in Dubai and the rest of the region. And definitely this opportunity that came across us, I can see that's a great opportunity for everyone here to develop and doing business. And I'm here to try to explain from my experience what can we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shlomi. So as mentioned, we are going to start with some questions that I've prepared. And then if our participants would like to ask questions, you are more than welcome to write them in the chat box. Maris, I would actually want to ask you, this is kind of, let's call it an intro question to kind of set the background for this entire webinar. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the Abraham Accords between the UAE and Israel mean for both UAE and Israel from a business perspective for each nation in general?
Thank you, Yara. So I was actually there the night that the accords were signed with my Emirati sponsor in the UAE. And this is someone who never acknowledged the existence of Israel. So as a Cypriot, we would usually catch up and he would never allow me to bring in the conversation the word Israel. And ironically, that night, we watched the signing of the agreement together. So it basically means that the wall has been broken, right? There was, even though there was business done through other parties and there were a lot of Israeli people that held secondary passports doing business in the UAE, now that wall is being removed and it opens the floodgates for business, not just between the two countries, but also each of the countries' scope of influence commercially. And in the case of Israel, as we know, it's a technologically advanced country, very progressive, very educated population, arms, technology, agriculture, and the UAE is a regional hub. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but it's a regional hub. So the UAE has a huge scope of influence in the Northern African part, and it is the gateway to the African continent and perhaps most of the remaining of the MENA region. And they do that by having Emirates and Etihad, which are two of the largest airlines that cover most of the world. And secondly, through their commercial ports, which I guess the Israelis know about the port operations of Dubai, since, as I understand, they're looking at forming a partnership for the port in one of the ports in Israel. So for me, that changes the landscape altogether. I also think that the needs and the expertise of each country are complementary. A lot of the things that Israel has been working on are of great use to the UAE. And this, in my opinion, transpires more than the obvious, which is defense and technology, but things about water, the environment, recycling, etc., etc. And similarly, the UAE has, because of its unique culture, and we'll talk about that in a second, offers a unique opportunity for some Israeli companies to be based there and take advantage of their more relaxed immigration laws. It's very easy to bring workers from third countries and set up shop in the UAE. The tax regime, there is no corporate tax, there's no personal tax. So it's a good place to set up either a development center or a regional distribution center or a headquarter or any of these other things. So I have been very excited from the day of the signing of the accords, and it's a great change. Also, before I close, I also want to say that as a Cypriot, with my country has very close relationships with both of these countries, I am ecstatic because now it opens the gateway to this continuum of friendly, business-minded, progressive countries in our, difficult part of the world to do business together and to explore all sorts of different partnerships. So I look forward to sharing some examples with you today and helping answering questions with whatever request you have. Thank you.
I think that's mutual for everybody that's here. It is very, very exciting, and it was interesting to hear what you said about the fact that Cyprus has close relationship both with the UAE and with Israel, of course. I would want to ask you, Gil, just to jump right into the whole legal issue. We know that legal and business usually go together. Where there is business, legal follows. Can you tell us something about the legal landscape in Israel that can be useful for Emiratis or foreigners in general that are considering doing business in Israel?
Yes, sure. Okay. First of all, I just want to echo very quickly what Mario said about the peace accords. Just extremely, he covered almost everything that I would want to say. From the point of view of an Israeli, it's extremely exciting to have the opportunities to work with such a major and important Arab country. And you know, hopefully this will be the stepping stone to many more things. In fact, I think 5 minutes after the Abraham Accords were first announced, Mario's already sent me a message hoping to set up some kind of cooperation. And that is something that I'm seeing a lot of. There's a lot of willingness on the streets of the UAE as well as on the streets of Israel. That's very important. So going now to look a bit at the legal landscape that may interest Emiratis and other foreigners that will want to do business in Israel. So first of all, Israel is a common law jurisdiction with some elements of civil law. The highest court of the land is the Supreme Court, which acts like as the ultimate appeal court for civilian and criminal proceedings, and also as the High Court of Justice, where various petitions are made against governmental institutions. Emiratis should know that there's a lot of regulation in Israel that covers many facets of doing business in Israel, covering such things as the kind of businesses that require licenses to operate, quality and safety standards, environmental protection, government procurement, consumer protection, monopolies and restrictive practices, imports and exports, privacy and data protection, mergers and acquisitions, and many more regulations. And these are all implemented by a large number of different government offices, some of which are very bureaucratic and tiring to work with, and others that are more efficient. So for Emiratis wanting to do business in Israel, particularly in various specific industries, it'd be very important to have Israeli boots on the ground to help them navigate all of this. And this is something that we at Joseph Shem Tov Company do on a daily basis, both for our Israeli clients and for our foreign clients. In terms of doing business in Israel, the legal entities that are normally relevant are companies with liability limited by shares. There's also general and limited partnerships and certain other vehicles, although in most cases the company will be the most appropriate and normally the most popular form for doing business. Israeli companies are similar in form to English companies with a few little differences. The reasons for them being the popular choice is the separation between the company itself and its owners as far as taxes go and liabilities of the business. And of course, there's also the option for Emirati businesses, the companies and partnerships, to open up their own office branches here in Israel. Something to think about when thinking of international commercial transactions between the two countries is that Israeli tax laws have transfer pricing rules which apply to international transactions between related companies, parents, subsidiaries, joint venturing. So when setting out on a new joint venture, it's very important to plan for these considerations in advance. I'm assuming that I've done quite well for time now. Should I go on, or that's it?
You can go on if there's.
Okay, so the next thing that I would really talk about is in terms of contract law. Normally, when engaging in international commercial transactions, Israeli companies are often willing to agree to the laws of other countries to govern their contracts. That's not always the case, particularly where the majority of the contracts are going to be performed in Israel. So it's worth Emiratis knowing a little bit about Israeli contract law. It's similar in many ways to, or at least based on English law, although with some pretty major differences these days. For example, consideration isn't required for forming a contract in Israel, just offer and acceptance. There's a doctrine of good faith in Israeli contract law. Parties are required to conduct themselves in good faith, both during contract performance, but also during negotiation. And if you withhold important information during a negotiation, you can end up in breach of contract even before signing on the dotted line. The general principle of contract law here is that parties can pretty much enter into any terms that they choose, although that is restricted by a lot of the regulation that I mentioned earlier. For example, certain restrictive clauses, exclusivity provisions can fall foul of Israeli competition law or may require the approval of the Israeli Competition Authority. So yeah.
Okay, great. I would want to go back to discussing the business aspect. So Shlomi, I would like to ask you, what do you see as the best business opportunities for Israelis and Emiratis to work together? We know you have experience in working in the UAE, so to kind of share your experience would be also great.
So first of all, to cement relationship between countries is the first thing is the quickest way to do it is through trading. And Dubai is a center of trading with Jebel Ali and 8,000 factories around the area there, and definitely Israelis already trade there. And I hear from spare parts for car spare parts to cheese even is being brought from Abu Dhabi to Israel now. Cars and many more things, consumer products that actually being stored there and actually being brought to Dubai to distribute it in the area. And this can come to Israel, and some of them are already arriving to Israel. At the same time, we are exporting already agriculture, and Agrexco is doing export there and by air and by sea. And you could see our products on the market there, and are very proud to present it with Israeli flag on it, which was surprisingly nice for us, and it was very nice, very good. At the same time, the next step was tourism, and again, Israelis flooded Dubai, and at a certain time we had more than 65,000 people in Dubai, and this is something which was very important for us to show the Israelis actually what is Dubai looks like and what is Dubai is about. And I can tell you that many people that came there for holiday asking again when we're going to the market is going to be open so we can fly and enjoy and the place. So it's a remarkable place, and I think that for Israelis to come to see what happened there in this place from 1982, I think, or it's amazing. Whenever I came the first time and to see the changes there, it's amazing. And it's something that we could learn as Israelis, what was done in this country by the leaderships and the vision of the people there. The other business which we are doing, as probably you mentioned, Marius mentioned it, is that we are going together with DP World, the biggest, one of the biggest port operators around the world that has got a port operation in Limassol, hopefully on a tender in Haifa. And I hope that we will have a chance to win this place together and develop the business. Now, why is it so important? Because whenever you're talking about east of Israel, which is Iraq and trading, Key factor is, of course, good port operations, and this is something which we are looking forward, and with a partner that knows how to work together with us to overcome all the obstacles transporting goods from Jordan, from Jordan to Iraq and Baghdad, especially. It makes sense that cargo that is coming from the west will go via Haifa, and that's why we are working very hard, and hopefully we'll have the chance to win. So, so as I mentioned, trading and tourism is the first thing, and the investment, it's the second and the third stage. And Israel is on the investment side, could see the benefit in Dubai by putting a plant there. It takes time. It's not in one day. It's very easy to open a company there, and there is a tax benefit for the Israelis to be there. Now, if you look at our industry, you see that our main industry in Israel is going to be digital. Everything is, even the market from film industry to a gaming industry, for fintech industry, so many digital businesses is being built right now in Israel, and this is creating new jobs. Now, if Israelis will keep head office in Dubai with a tax incentive there on the digital world, it's very simple to do it. They could benefit by paying less tax, doing it via Dubai, and this is something I could see a huge opportunity for Israelis investors to put operations there, and I can tell you that I myself is doing it already, and some good friends of mine are doing it too. And of course, production, manufacturing in the Jebel Ali area or the free zones there is big opportunity, because there are markets of about 2 billion people around the area there that we never actually came across and serving them regularly. And an opportunity of made in Dubai and distributing and bringing workforce, which could come from all over the area there to work there in a good taxation environment, gives a huge opportunity for Israelis manufacturers to move producing there. So in general, huge opportunities, both sides, and as you see that the Dubais are willing to invest with us here in Israel, and we are interested to invest there, and we're doing it already. And I can see that the cooperation of technology-based companies here and manufacturing capabilities in Dubai, with a good workforce that we can bring all over the place, from all over the area there, and market, which is about 2 billion people around the area there, gives us a huge opportunity, and we should try to enlarge and to develop it. And we could see that this appetite of developing business together, which actually I believe that the real peace is coming through economic progress. We could see that the Egyptians already talking to us and said, let's try to develop more business. We can see that you're doing already with the Emiratis. We would like also, and I will be there also next week in Egypt for this reason. And definitely Jordan and the rest of the country. So it's moving. Something is moving in the Middle East, and it's so important that people can actually benefit. The end users are the people will enjoy and create value for themselves by doing business together.
All right, Shlomi, thank you very much. Shlomi, you were referring to UAE investors that might be interested in investing in Israel. And Gila, I wanted to ask you, with regards to people from the UAE that are interested in investing in Israel, or foreigners in general, what are, as the lawyer here, what are the legal barriers that foreigners or Emiratis planning on investing in Israel should know about? What are the main things?
Well, actually, the Israeli economy, what with Israel being what it is, really does rely a lot on transacting with the world, with the international community. And that's reflected in the fact that there's really very little in terms of barriers for foreigners or Emiratis to do business in Israel, and for Israelis to do business with foreigners. Of course, there are some exceptions. For example, Israelis and Israeli nationals and companies are prohibited from engaging in business with nationals and companies from enemy states. although that is no longer something that is applicable to the topic of this particular webinar. In terms of investing in companies, shareholdings in Israeli companies, there's no real restriction on the amount, the percentage that foreigners can hold in Israeli companies. In fact, you can have Israeli companies that are completely held by foreign investors. Again, some very, very small exceptions to that. For example, manufacturers of firearms require a permit for their activities, and that permit requires that the company is owned and controlled by Israelis. But that's like a very limited and specific type of exception. The vast majority of the time, there's really no barriers. Also, in terms of the regulations I mentioned before, there are various activities if you want to engage in Israel that require licenses and permits, whether it's providing legal and accounting services, medical services, things relating to food and drink and so on, they require licensing and permits. But, that's the same for Israelis. And in most cases, those licenses and permits are also available for foreigners that want to do business in Israel, so long as they are able to meet the requisite conditions. So all in all, we're a very open and welcoming country, and open and welcoming economy, and the more the merrier.
All right, that's the more the merrier is a good thing. Marius, I would like to take the next question with you. You split your time between Cyprus and the UAE, and you have a lot of experience working in the UAE. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about the UAE and what makes it such an attractive destination for businesses?
Thank you, Yara, and thank you to Shlomi. I haven't promised Shlomi any nice meal or good wine, but I thought he did a fantastic job selling the UAE. So if I look at the things from the top, right, the UAE is a country that historically has been in commerce. So in the DNA of the Emiratis, it is deeply rooted that they're there to facilitate trade. That is, you have ports and airports. So the first thing that happened in Dubai, for example, 35, 40 years ago, was the creation of Jebel Ali port. So this is not a coincidence. This is not an afterthought. The foundation of the country is based around trade. And therefore, the whole country today operates, and especially Dubai, around facilitating business. And Dubai, unlike most people think, is not a place that can rely on fossil fuels. To the contrary. And therefore, their biggest value of Dubai is their brand. So you have a combination of the proper commercial DNA, they understand that brand is important, and they're pro-business. That makes them a unique place where the whole system, regulation, the country, it is there to encourage and facilitate business. And Shlomi gave a perfect example of Jebel Ali, right? So they have free zones that are built around the port. So them taking over the port of Haifa, it is not just about the pure logistics of port operations, right? DIP will go there and build all sorts of infrastructure around it. And they own the port in Dubai, and they have ports in North Africa, and they have the port in Limassol. So you're creating a network of ports. So that is very important to always remember about the UAE, pro-business. The second thing is there is no tax. There is no corporate tax, and there is no personal tax. So it is quite shocking to some people how there is no taxation. The republic, the country, is not a republic, the country feels no obligation to offer anything to the people who live there for free. So you pay for things, but it's like a Chinese menu. So you need a company, you pay for the license, and it's not in Cyprus, for example, to set up a company, you pay 350 euros. In the UAE, you pay 10,000, but that's your fee. You don't pay taxes, right? So, and again, that pro-business, pro-commerce attitude transpires here. We can set up a company in less than 2 weeks. And the country is based on people who are not from there. So 80+% of the population are not from the UAE. And you can see this in my organization, right? I am from Cyprus, Nick is French, Joel is South African, we have Indians, Filipinos, we have Serbians, you name it, because it is such a global society, which means that setting up shop and hiring people, it is so quick and so efficient. So the opportunity here for an Israeli company, as Shlomi said, is, let's take the example of manufacturing, right? Because it would be very low on the list of things that one would think about, right? You can go to Jebel Ali, form a company in 2 weeks. You can rent a warehouse that is up to spec. They even have a refrigerated storage ready to rent, right? You can bring workers from any country of the world, with the exception of maybe Syria and Nigeria. They will have a visa within the first month, and you can set up a fully operational team in the UAE extremely quickly and with no taxes. I doubt that there is any other country on earth that can do this. And then the country is extremely progressive. They take pride that they have inherited this money from fossil fuel from their ancestors, and they want to be the best. And in my opinion, in addition to all the peace and pro-business things that are behind the Abraham Accords between the UAE and Israel, it is also the wish for them to be associated with the progressiveness of Israel. They want to be the first in everything: the tallest building, the longest highway, the cleanest streets, the biggest gardens, the highest number of trademarks, things that in the Arab world and North Africa would never be spoken of. So they are changing the platform. The conversation is disruptive from where they were. And our clientele, in the case of Loggerhead, they are from all over the world. So our clients come from east to west. And the common characteristic is that they're business people, they're progressive, they're looking for a regional center to set up their business that is tax efficient. We have clients that can be from any country, buy chickens from Brazil, and they send them to Indonesia. And they're based in Dubai. Why? Because it is the most favorable tax regime, because the logistics allow them to do that, and they operate in a country that is absolutely pro-business. And as Shlomi said, there were Israeli people doing business in the UAE for quite some time. So the fact that you have consumer goods on the shelves of supermarkets today with the Israeli flag in less than 6 months, it is miraculous. So I encourage everybody to jump on the plane on the next opportunity, come to the UAE, bring your families, give us a call, we'll take you around and show you some of the business aspects, because it is probably unlike something you have seen before. And I say this while I sit in Cyprus, that is a place that plays in the same category, and a lot of you Israelis have probably come to Cyprus, right? But in Cyprus, to do something with the authorities, you need months. In the UAE, you count days. And that is very important in our fast changing world.
Marius, thank you. I think you convinced me, and so did Shlomi. And I would want to refer the next question to Nicholas. Let's say that Marius and Shlomi actually convinced me to open up my business in the UAE. What do I need to know about company formation options that are available in the UAE as a foreigner?
Thank you, Yao. So the word I keep hearing during this seminar is pro-business, and it's exactly true. You see it in company formation solutions that the UAE is offering. As a foreigner, you have 3 jurisdictions you can choose from in the UAE, actually. You have the standard offshore jurisdictions, such as Iraq ICC and JAFSA. Those are very similar to the BVI or to the Caribbean jurisdictions. I will not really cover them here because it's not the point of this webinar. You've got about 50 free zones, which is one jurisdiction. They're all independent. They all have their singularities, but we call them the free zone jurisdictions. And you've got the so-called onshore jurisdiction, which is everything that is mainland Dubai, fully fledged local companies. So if we ignore the offshore jurisdictions here and we focus on the free zones and the onshore companies, those are available to foreigners. The thing is, only free zone jurisdictions actually offer unconditional 100% ownership to foreigners. Mainland companies require a local individual or a local entity to own 51% of the company. This can be bypassed sometimes with a local agent that will act as a representative with all government dealings against a yearly fee. But the general information to take from this is that local companies require a local individual to be involved in the company. So the mainland companies are approved by the Department of Economic Development. You come to Dubai, you set it up in less than 2 weeks. It can be an LLC, it could be a civil company, it could be a branch of an Israeli company. You name it, all legal forms are available. Those companies, mainland companies, are eligible for residency visas, which makes them very interesting. The business activity can be trading, consultancy, whatever, you name it. They have a list of thousands and thousands of activities that you can choose from. Like I said, the only drawback is that you need to find a local individuals to own this 51%. But again, we make the owner, the local owner, sign a side agreement where he relinquishes his 51% against a yearly fee, and he doesn't get involved in the management of the company. So that makes it very interesting for foreign investors as well.
Okay.
If we move to, yep, sorry.
No, I wanted to ask, how would that be different if I am a UAE resident, and what are the benefits? But go ahead and we'll get to that.
No, well, you become a UAE resident by applying for a residency visa under the company itself. Being a resident will not make a difference here. You will need a local citizen to own 51% of your company. But there are ways to go around this, like I discussed. So for example, consultancy company or service companies will have a local agent. The foreign individual will own 100% of the company. He will have an agent on the side that will be there to make a yearly fee and sign some government papers. He will basically supervise what's going on, but he will not be owning any shares or taking any profits back home. But that was, I was going to come to the free zone companies. Those are extremely interesting to foreign investors. The free zone companies are the sweet spot, actually. They can be 100% owned by foreigners. They're eligible to investors visa, to employee visas. You can have a company as big or as small as you want. You can set them up in as little as 2 weeks. You can rent flexi desks if you don't want to put any money in office solutions, or you can rent buildings, warehouses, you name it. There's no limitation there. There are obviously 0% taxes on those companies. And you have more than 50 free zones in the UAE you can choose from, depending on the business activity you want, depending on the location, depending on the infrastructure the free zone can offer. So those are the jurisdiction a foreign investor can choose from. There's no limitations on nationalities either, besides, like Marius mentioned a bit earlier, Syrians, Nigeria, some of those countries. In terms of company incorporation, Yara, you were asking, how fast and how efficient it is. It's very, very efficient. We need about 2 weeks to set up a company in the UAE. Most of the time, we don't need the shareholders to be in Dubai. And after those 2 weeks, it takes another couple of weeks to make the shareholders residents of Dubai, and they become fully fledged residents at this point.
Sounds pretty simple.
Well, it's a straightforward process if you know what you're doing. That's what we specialize on.
Right. And can I ask you a little bit about, I know one of Loggerhead's specialties is residency planning. How would that benefit clients tax-wise?
Absolutely. So we specialize on residency planning, and that's actually the first thing we do and we offer. We have a residency package that is one of the best-selling solutions that we have. There are 2 ways in the UAE to become a UAE resident. You either form a company, again, I'm talking for investors here. You either form a company, either free zones or mainland company, as I mentioned before, or you buy real estate, as simple as this. Once this is done, you apply for the residency, you get your residency visa, and you can maintain, and you will maintain this resident status as long as the visa holder comes to Dubai 1 day every 6 months. That's all that is required, not more. There's no minimum stay requirement. And we specialize on this. So when a client comes to us for resident planning solutions, we set up the whole thing from A to Z. It starts with the company formation. We move on to the visa application, and later on we have other things such as obtaining residential solutions for our client, setting their whole life here. We provide family office solutions, so you understand what that means.
Okay, thank you very much. Joel, I would like to refer the next question to you. What kind of clients or people could actually benefit from adding a UAE structure to their portfolio? And can you give us a few real world examples?
Yeah, sure. So just give me a second. I'm going to share my screen so that I can answer your question. Okay, so the kinds of clients that our UAE solutions are well suited to are firstly your business owners, entrepreneurs, big corporate entities or corporate groups and family businesses that are maybe looking for a more tax-friendly jurisdiction from which to base their operations, and also high net worth individuals and their families that are maybe looking for more confidentiality in terms of reporting of their assets, and also are looking for a place of alternate residency, somewhere that's easy to maintain the residency and somewhere that they could live comfortably if they needed to. So I'm going to run you through two quick examples of some structures that we've put in place for our clients. Example number one, we have an individual who's got an existing business in his home country. He decides to establish a UAE free zone company. As Nicholas mentioned, as owner of the company, he is entitled to become a UAE resident. Once he's a UAE resident, he can then open a personal bank account in the UAE, and he can then open a private bank account as a UAE resident elsewhere in the world. Our client also rents a property in the UAE to establish a proof of residence. And once he's had this structure in place for about 9 months, our client is entitled to then apply for a UAE tax residency certificate, which establishes him as a tax resident of the UAE, which basically means for exchange of information or CRS reporting purposes, his private bank accounts elsewhere in the world will now report his information to the UAE only, as he's established himself as a tax resident there. Then from his business's point of view, his existing business in his home country would sell his products to the UAE free zone company at a low margin. And then the UAE entity now becomes the entity that sells directly to the end clients at retail price, which then means that the profits can remain in the UAE and free of corporate tax, as we mentioned before, and these profits can then be distributed to the individual as shareholder of the client in the UAE as well, which means he then also benefits from no personal income tax. And then moving on to example number two, we've got a software development company currently existing in a high tax jurisdiction, and the three owners decide that they are going to establish a UAE free zone company instead. They liquidate the existing company to cut tax links with the home country. However, the software development team remains in the home country. They establish a new company, which is separate and at arm's length from the previous one. And then the UAE free zone company now becomes the entity that has the contracts in place with the clients. The UAE entity invoices the clients and receives all the profits, and the UAE entity then pays the development team in the home country a fee for their services, which again then allows the profit to remain in the UAE entity, and the three owners of the UAE entity now get to take advantage of the individual benefits by becoming residents, being able to open their own bank accounts, establish tax residency, etc. So yeah, that's just two examples of structures we've put in place for our clients that allow them to take advantage of the benefits that are available from both a corporate structuring point of view as well as the residency point of view as well.
Perfect. That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Gil, I would like to ask you a little bit about the Loggerhead JST partnership. How will this collaboration that obviously has an interesting global reach can assist each of your clients?
Yeah, okay. So going back to one of the things that I mentioned earlier on, is all about boots on the ground in each country. We're clearly at a time where there are a lot of opportunities, and for example, a lot of Israeli clients will be interested in doing business with Emiratis in the UAE, and we can help them with various aspects of that, various aspects of the international commercial agreements, and so on and so forth. But where Loggerhead come in is that they can provide for our clients the services that they've described in this webinar and the advice that they've described regarding, whether to set up a company in a free trade zone and which trade zone, and various other aspects of their wealth management and tax planning and so on and so forth. So for us to be able to offer our clients that added value of having a close working relationship with a firm like Loggerhead in the UAE is very important, and completes what we can provide for our clients looking to come into the UAE. And conversely, where there are Emiratis or other clients of Loggerhead, because as Marios mentioned, they have clients that are doing business in the UAE, although they're based all over the world. And anytime that they have somebody that is interested in doing business in Israel, or has business interests in Israel, and requires legal advice on the activities in Israel, so we are here to complete that service for Loggerhead Partners. And obviously, if there are other requirements of these clients, not limited to the law, but accounting and whatever else may be required in Israel. So we're here, we know the people, we have the contacts, and we can help to Loggerhead provide the solutions just in the same way that they can help us provide the UAE solutions for our Israeli clients.
Okay, Marius, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. So our world is getting closer, and we are moving away from transactional interactions between service providers and clients to a relationship-based. And as part of that relationship-based, confidentiality and no loose ends is integral for us. Therefore, from the Loggerhead's point of view, Gil and his team and his colleagues in Israel are our extension in Israel. So our clients, from wherever they are, if they need anything in Israel, then we will provide them an integrated service utilizing Gil's and his firm's expertise and relationships in Israel, and vice versa, as we hope to see an influx of Israeli business people into the UAE, then we will approach the whole structuring as one solution, whether part of it is delivered by Gil and his team, or whether it's delivered by our team in the UAE. To the client is one holistic solution so that we can retain the confidentiality and quality of service.
Okay. Thank you for that. I would just like to remind the audience that if you have any questions, we have a couple of questions already received, but if you have questions for our panelists, this is the time to write them down in the chat. You can send it directly to me, or just to write them in the chat and everybody can see them. So we have one question. I think Nicholas referred to this, but maybe there's need in further elaboration. One question is, what does tax residency in the UAE entail, and how does that compete with the other low or no tax jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I can take that question. So to become a tax resident in the UAE, very similar process to what I mentioned in my example. So the first step would be to obtain your UAE residence visa, which you would do through forming a company, or, as Nicholas mentioned, investing in property. Once you've got the UAE residence visa in place, you then would rent an apartment or something similar to establish a proof of residence. You would open a personal bank account. You would have some income or salary coming into that account. And then once you've had that structure in place for a while, you can apply and get a UAE tax residence certificate. This tax residence certificate basically then confirms you are now a tax resident in the UAE, and allows for all your reporting to be done to the UAE as opposed to your home country etc. And how it compares to other jurisdictions. Firstly, the UAE residency is very easy to maintain. As Nick mentioned earlier as well, you only need to enter once every 6 months or 180 days, and there's no minimum stay required. So it's very easy. It's a very easy alternate residency to maintain. Yeah, I don't know if Nick or Maris has anything to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
And the UAE, it's a real country, right? Because we should not compare the UAE to Caribbean jurisdiction or a low tax, right? Because most low tax countries are, island countries, right? So they're not real countries. So there's no question about why you're in the UAE. You're there because it's a trading hub, because it's a business hub, right? So all these things are done easily from one side, but done easily in a proper country. And someone who is an international business person and doesn't spend the bulk of its time in a single country, then this is perfect. And I understand that, for Israelis, you have as many Israelis living outside Israel as you do in Israel. So I think this could be a fantastic solution for people who spend their time in multiple locations and they need to have to be tax residents of somewhere that is efficient.
And to add to this, there's the cost aspect as well and the commitment. So becoming a UAE resident in the end doesn't force you to commit for 5, 10 years. You can do it for a year, you can do it for 2, for 3 years. And we're talking about a cost of $25,000 to $30,000 per year if you want to maintain this full residency package, plus the cost of coming here twice a year. In the big scheme of things, it's not an expensive residency to maintain. It's really not. So I think that adds to the easiness of setting it up. There's the easiness and the cost effectiveness of maintaining it, and a little commitment as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question is for Gil. Are special permits required if we want to send someone to work in Israel as an employee of a subsidiary or a branch, for example? And if so, what rights will apply to this employee?
Okay, I assume that what they mean is someone coming from outside Israel, like from the Emirates, to work within Israel as an employee. So yes, work and residency permits would be required. They need to be applied for from the Population and Immigration Authority, which is under the Ministry of the Interior. The permits must be applied for a specific position and a specific employer. And the application process takes between 60 to 90 days. Generally speaking, as a fallback, Israeli employment law will apply, and the foreign employee will have the same rights as Israeli employees. It is possible in the employment agreement to agree to another jurisdiction's laws to apply, but generally speaking, if the laws of the other jurisdiction provide considerably less rights to employees than are provided to Israeli employees, then the courts are likely to apply the Israeli law.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, will our panelists be interested in saying a couple of closing words? We're about to end.
Well, if it's okay, I'll just start by saying again, very, very exciting times, very exciting opportunities. I want to pick up on one little thing that Mario said in his opening statement, which is about the fact that it's not just Israelis selling to UAEs and working in UAE and Emiratis selling to Israel and working and doing stuff in Israel. But there are so many opportunities for the two countries and businesses in the two countries to join together, to work together, to spread it out across the region and beyond. And really, there's such a wide scope of opportunities, and we really do hope that the maximum potential will be realised. And we at Joseph Shem Tov and company are certainly excited and looking forward to working with Loggerhead Partners in the years to come.
Thank you, Gil. From my point of view, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and then thank Gil and Joseph Shem Tov for this relationship. We are very excited for commercial terms, for from a peace perspective, and I think this is the new world, right? I mean, it's a complicated world out there, and you need to set up the team of people that you trust. And here we have a unique opportunity. And as a Cypriot, it has a great meaning because I come from a small country. I have two of my country's good friends, forming a team. And I think that opens the region, it opens the world for business opportunities. I want to extend an invitation to everyone on this call. When you travel, not if, when you travel to the UAE, shoot us an email. If I'm not there, I'm sure Nick and Joel, be happy to show you around, walk you through the commercial aspects of the UAE, and make sure that you can capitalize on the opportunities there. Thank you.
All right, I think this is it unless the audience has more questions. And if not, we will end our webinar now. That will also be available because we recorded this. I would like to thank everybody for joining in. And I guess that's it. Stay safe.
Thank you,
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Everyone.